20 restaurant chains from the 1970s that never made it to the other side. The 1970s were a decade of genuine experimentation in American dining. New concepts were launching constantly, families were eating out more than any previous generation, and the country was discovering what it wanted from a restaurant. Some of the ideas that emerged from that era became permanent fixtures of American life. Others burned through their moment and vanished. What follows are the ones that didn't survive. Wags. The name Wags tends to get misattributed to Wendy's, but the chain actually came out of Walgreens. In the 1970s, drugstores were looking hard for strategies to increase foot traffic and capture a larger share of customer spending, and a sit-down restaurant attached to the pharmacy was one of the more ambitious ideas anyone came up with. Walgreens committed to it seriously, and for a stretch of years, the results justified the investment.
Wags positioned itself in the space between fast food and fine dining. More comfortable and generous than a burger counter, less formal and expensive than a proper restaurant. The menu was built around classic American comfort food. Burgers, steaks, sandwiches, all served in portions that felt substantial and priced in a range that middle-class families could afford without calculation. The roast beef sandwiches became a particular point of pride. All-day breakfast was available at a time when virtually no other chain was offering it past mid-morning, which meant that late at night you could order pancakes, a milkshake, a club sandwich, or all three simultaneously. For anyone who had spent years being told breakfast ended at 10:30, that freedom was genuinely appealing. For a while, Wags thrived. Then the 1980s arrived, and the casual dining segment transformed around it.
Chains like TGI Fridays and Chili's came in with updated environments, broader menus, and a sharper sense of what customers in that decade wanted from an evening out. Wags didn't update. Its menu stayed largely what it had always been. Its atmosphere remained unchanged, and what had once felt reliably comfortable began to feel merely dated. The customers who had come for something solid and dependable gradually drifted toward places offering something more current. Walgreens made the rational decision to exit a business that was no longer core to what it did, selling off locations in stages through the 1980s. By 1991, the last of them had changed hands, and the Wags name had been retired. Chi-Chi's. Chi-Chi's did something that's easy to underestimate in hindsight. It introduced Tex-Mex food to a mainstream American audience that had barely encountered it.
Founded in Minneapolis and expanding rapidly through the late 1970s, the chain grew to more than 200 locations and became the primary reference point for Mexican restaurant dining in communities across the country. Before Chi-Chi's, most of those communities had no reference point at all. The experience was designed to feel festive from the moment you walked in. Colorful lighting overhead, margaritas arriving in large glasses, music that made the room feel alive, and plates stacked with the kind of Americanized Tex-Mex that was heavy, satisfying, and built for sharing. The nachos, covered in melted cheese, jalapenos, and every topping available, were the kind of thing people ordered at every visit. The chimichangas became synonymous with the chain itself. Family-style portions made Chi-Chi's the obvious choice for birthday dinners and group gatherings. For its first decade, the restaurant delivered everything it promised. The first problem was one of style rather than quality. The heavily fried, cheese-laden approach to Mexican food that had felt exciting when Chi-Chi's launched gradually came to seem limited as authentic regional Mexican restaurants began appearing in more American cities, and as consumers started wanting fresher, lighter ingredients. Chi-Chi's menu stayed largely where it had started, and the gap between what the chain was offering and what the market was beginning to want grew slowly wider. The second problem was catastrophic. In 2003, a hepatitis A outbreak was linked to a Chi-Chi's location in Pennsylvania. The source was contaminated green onions. More than 600 people fell ill. 4 died. The legal consequences were financially devastating, and the blow to the brand's reputation was one it could not survive. The chain that had introduced millions of Americans to margaritas and nachos was finished.
Victoria Station. Victoria Station came out of the early 1970s carrying a concept that was genuinely inventive. 3 Harvard Business School graduates built the chain around the atmosphere of classic railway travel, and they committed to the theme with real conviction. Multiple locations were constructed using actual converted railway cars, turning each restaurant into something closer to an immersive experience than a standard dining room. The menu leaned into American comfort: steaks, barbecue ribs, and substantial dishes that matched the setting's sense of occasion. Families and travelers responded well to the combination of reliable food and a physical environment unlike anything else available. By the mid-70s, the chain had expanded to more than 100 domestic locations and had begun moving internationally. The nostalgic atmosphere and the quality of the food had produced a customer base that returned with genuine loyalty.
Behind that loyalty, costs were rising in ways that made the operation increasingly difficult to sustain. Food and operating expenses climbed through the late 70s, and maintaining the quality that customers expected became a real challenge. While Victoria Station held on to its original look and its original menu, the restaurant landscape around it was changing. Newer chains were arriving with more contemporary atmospheres and more updated approaches to food, and the comparison wasn't favorable to the chain's fixed aesthetic. The crisis came in the early 1980s. Overexpansion and management decisions that had looked reasonable during the growth years proved unsustainable once revenues began declining. Renovation efforts and menu updates were attempted without producing the results needed. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1986. Most locations had closed before the decade was out, and by the early 90s, Victoria Station had effectively disappeared from the American dining landscape. Bennigan's. Bennigan's was founded in 1976 by Norman Brinker, and in building it, he helped define what the casual dining category in the United States would look like for the decades that followed. The concept sat precisely at the intersection of 2 things that hadn't been fully combined before: the energy and informality of a neighborhood pub and the food and family accessibility of a mainstream restaurant. Locations were typically placed near shopping centers in suburban areas, putting the chain within easy reach of the audience it was designed for: working families, young professionals, groups of friends who wanted a relaxed evening without the commitment of a formal dinner. The atmosphere made Wednesday nights feel like the weekend. The prices made the decision easy.
The chicken tenders, by the account of many devoted customers, were the finest they had encountered anywhere. Birthdays, after-work gatherings, first dates, Bennigan's absorbed all of them without effort. At its peak, the chain compared favorably against Chili's, TGI Fridays, Applebee's, Red Robin, and Ruby Tuesday, and there were loyal customers who would have argued strongly that Bennigan's was better than all of them. The combination of atmosphere, food quality, and value was difficult to match. A small number of Bennigan's locations still operate in the United States. People who were regulars during the brand's best years generally agree that those survivors don't fully capture what made the original worth returning to.
Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips. Arthur Treacher's launched in 1969, named after the British actor, carrying a mission that was clear and deliberately contrarian. In a fast food market built almost entirely around beef, bring properly prepared fried fish to American consumers. The bet was that enough people wanted an alternative to make the investment worthwhile. By the middle of the 1970s, with more than 800 locations operating nationwide, the bet appeared to have paid off. The food was the real product. Atlantic cod battered precisely and fried to a deep, consistent golden crisp, thick-cut fries prepared by hand, hush puppies, sweet and savory fried dough rounding out the plate. For customers who had spent years eating the same burger at the same counter, Arthur Treacher's offered something genuinely different, and many of them were grateful for it. The problems converged from several directions at once. Health-conscious eating was becoming a real consumer trend through the late 70s, and a menu built around deep frying was increasingly difficult to position favorably. Supply chain issues forced the chain to replace the original Atlantic cod with cheaper fish, and customers who had been coming specifically for the cod's quality noticed the difference immediately. Competitors began offering grilled fish and lighter seafood options. Franchise operators complained about rising fees and declining corporate support. Interiors aged without being updated. Marketing failed to reach younger customers who hadn't grown up with the brand. Most locations had closed by the early 1980s. A handful survive in some form today, but the speed of the chain's decline remains a clear illustration of how quickly a fast food concept can unravel when multiple pressures arrive at the same time. Burger Chef. Burger Chef was the second largest fast food chain in the United States during the 1970s, with more than 1,200 locations at its peak, second only to McDonald's. That context tends to surprise people who have never heard of it, and the gap between what Burger Chef was at its height and how thoroughly it has been forgotten may be the most striking thing about its story. The innovations were real, and they were significant. Flame-broiled burgers, a works bar that let customers choose their own toppings, a customization concept that felt fresh and ahead of its time. Partial credit for popularizing the combo meal and the salad bar. A Super Chef burger that competed directly with the Big Mac and won considerable loyalty on the merits. A complete menu that included milkshakes, fried chicken, and fish sandwiches, making the chain a genuine one-stop destination. General Foods acquired the chain in 1968, and the management that followed was never adequate to the scale of what it was handling. Food quality became inconsistent across locations in ways that eroded the reputation the brand had taken years to build. Marketing grew muddled. As McDonald's and Burger King sharpened their operations and increased their reach, Burger Chef lost ground steadily and without an effective response. General Foods sold the remaining locations to Hardee's in 1982. The conversion of those sites to other brands happened over the years that followed, and by 1996, the last trace of Burger Chef had disappeared. The second largest fast food chain in the country had ceased to exist without most people noticing it was gone. Stuckey's. Stuckey's was one of the defining images of highway travel in mid-century America.
Starting from a roadside pecan stand in Georgia in the 1930s, the brand had grown into a nationwide institution by the 70s, with more than 350 locations placed along major interstates from coast to coast. If you were driving a significant distance across the country during those years, the teal-colored roof of a Stuckey's stop was as familiar as the mile markers. Pulling off the highway for a Stuckey's stop meant refueling the car, stretching, and loading up on things you absolutely didn't need but couldn't resist buying. The food was dependable roadside fare: hot dogs, burgers, Southern-style comfort dishes that did the job of feeding a family in transit. But the real attraction was the snack case. Pecan log rolls, pralines, nut candies in every variation, and the particular pleasure of impulse purchases made in a warm room after 2 hours on an interstate.
The brand had made that experience feel characteristically Southern, warm, and slightly nostalgic, even when it was happening in real time. Corporate travel centers began taking over the highway landscape, and national chains with greater resources established themselves at every major interchange. The audience that Stuckey's had served so reliably shifted its habits, and the brand didn't have the resources or the adaptability to hold its position. It contracted steadily until it had largely disappeared from the American roadside. Lums began as a hot dog stand on Miami Beach in the early 1950s and grew over the following 2 decades into a national chain with an identity genuinely unlike anything else in the fast food market. The central distinction was simple and unlikely. Lums served beer with your meal, at a time when essentially no other fast food operation was willing to try it. Everything about the chain was built around that personality. Hot dogs steamed in beer-soaked buns were the anchor item, and the detail of the beer bun elevated what was otherwise a modest dish into something that felt considered and slightly indulgent. The Lums Special, a hot dog piled with toppings inside that soft, beer-infused bun, was the kind of menu item customers came back specifically to order. Burgers and sandwiches filled out the menu, but the hot dog was always the heart of it. The interior matched the concept. Dark wood paneling, a bar presence in the corner, a general atmosphere closer to a neighborhood tavern than anything the fast food category had previously attempted. It was not a space designed around children, but it found and kept a loyal adult audience. Eventually, the novelty that had powered the chain's growth ran its natural course. As competition intensified through the late 70s and into the 80s, Lums found itself without an effective answer to the new players in the market.
The qualities that had made it distinctive were no longer sufficient to sustain it, and most locations had closed by the middle of the decade. The Brown Derby. The Brown Derby was not simply a successful restaurant. It was one of the most culturally significant dining establishments in American history, the central gathering place of Hollywood's golden era. Founded in 1929, it was where the film industry ate, dealt, and watched itself. The most celebrated location, built in the shape of a derby hat on Wilshire Boulevard, was a landmark as recognizable as any studio lot in Los Angeles. By the 1970s, the brand had expanded to several locations, including a presence inside Walt Disney World in Florida. The growth didn't diminish the chain's identity. The menu was refined and self-assured. Roast prime rib, fried chicken, a range of American dishes executed with genuine care. The Cobb salad, created by owner Bob Cobb, became one of the most enduring contributions any restaurant in history has made to American cuisine. The caricatures on the walls, portraits of the famous people who had eaten there across the decades, gave each room a kind of living history that no amount of money or decoration could have manufactured. What legacy and history couldn't provide was financial insulation. Business pressures accumulated over the latter part of the 20th century, and despite everything the name represented, the Brown Derby eventually filed for bankruptcy. The iconic Hollywood institution exited quietly, leaving behind one salad and one enormous reputation. Wimpy's. Wimpy's spent its most relevant American years attempting to carve out a specific position in the fast food market, elevated enough to feel like a genuine meal, accessible enough to function as a regular stop.
The approach showed itself in deliberate choices: real plates, actual silverware, a quarter-pound burger designed to be eaten with some care rather than consumed on the move. The sausage sandwich, called the Bender in a Bun, developed its own small and devoted following, and the overall concept had genuine appeal for customers who wanted the convenience of fast food without the disposable feel that usually came with it. For a specific kind of diner, Wimpy's was exactly right. But that specific appeal was also the brand's limitation. The plates and silverware that signaled quality also introduced friction that fast food customers increasingly didn't want. Consistency across locations was never strong enough to sustain the premium positioning the chain was trying to maintain. Quality varied in ways that undermined customer confidence. By the end of the 1970s, American Wimpy's locations had largely shut down. The name survives in several other countries to this day, but in the United States, it remains a memory of a concept that occupied a distinctive but ultimately unsustainable position. Beefsteak Charlie's. Beefsteak Charlie's had roots going back to the early 1900s, but its defining chapter was written during the 1970s in New York City. The offer was straightforward and deliberately generous. All-you-can-eat steak, endless shrimp cocktail, a salad bar overflowing with pasta salads and fresh toppings, unlimited beer and wine. Everything at prices that working-class New Yorkers could afford without a second thought. The result was an atmosphere that felt celebratory on an ordinary evening. Every table in those restaurants carried a sense of occasion that most dining experiences don't produce. The chain expanded rapidly along the East Coast through the late 70s, riding the reputation that its specific formula had built. Regulars returned because the value was genuine, and the food, when things were working, was genuinely good. The economics of the model were always precarious. The volume of food being provided at those prices demanded throughput that was difficult to maintain while keeping costs in line. As operating expenses climbed through the 1980s, the formula became increasingly difficult to sustain. More damaging than the financial pressure was the quality decline that eventually followed. When longtime customers began noticing that the food was no longer what they remembered, the loyalty the chain had worked hard to build eroded with surprising speed. By the early 90s, Beefsteak Charlie's had joined the long list of great New York institutions that exist now only in conversation. Sandy's. Sandy's entered the fast food market in 1958, with McDonald's specifically in its sights. The chain differentiated itself through a Scottish heritage theme, a bagpiper mascot, distinctive slogans, a character that felt playful and family-oriented in ways that the Golden Arches couldn't replicate. The core product was a 20-cent hamburger that represented real value, accompanied by thick, creamy milkshakes that built their own loyal following. Through the 1960s, expansion was solid, and the brand's identity was clear. The 1970s transformed the competitive environment in ways that overwhelmed that clarity. McDonald's and Burger King were operating at a scale and a marketing spend that most mid-sized chains simply couldn't match, and Sandy's found itself unable to hold its footing. An attempt at modernization, which included abandoning the Scottish theme in search of a more contemporary identity, produced the worst possible outcome. The chain lost the distinctiveness that had given it whatever advantage it possessed, without gaining the resources to compete on neutral terms. Hardee's acquired Sandy's in 1973, and by 1979, every remaining location had been converted. A once promising McDonald's rival had been absorbed and erased. Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken. If there is a single cautionary tale on this list about the dangers of expanding faster than your ability to deliver quality, it is Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken. Launched in 1966, the chain borrowed the name and persona of beloved country comedian Minnie Pearl to position itself as a premium Southern fried chicken concept capable of competing directly with KFC. For a brief moment, the strategy appeared to be working. More than 300 locations opened across the South and Midwest within a few years. The speed of that expansion was not matched by the quality of what was actually being served. Customers who arrived expecting a superior fried chicken experience frequently found something that failed to meet even basic expectations. The coating lacked crispness, the seasoning was inconsistent, and chicken was sometimes undercooked. The franchise network had grown far beyond anyone's capacity to manage it, and the result was a product that consistently failed to deliver the one thing the brand had promised. Financial instability followed the operational failure. By 1971, the company was facing lawsuits alleging mismanagement and financial fraud. The press coverage that followed destroyed the remaining public confidence. Locations closed in escalating numbers. By the mid-70s, Minnie Pearl's fried chicken had effectively ceased to exist, a brand that had expanded itself into collapse before it had a chance to succeed. Geno's Hamburgers. Gino Marchetti was a Hall of Fame NFL defensive end who took the success he had built on the football field and turned it toward the restaurant industry, co-founding Gino's Hamburgers in 1957. The chain established a strong regional presence across the Mid-Atlantic, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, built around the Gino Giant Burger, which drew consistent comparisons to the Big Mac but earned genuine praise for having a more distinctive flavor. An early partnership with KFC made Gino's one of the first fast food concepts to offer burgers and fried chicken under a single roof, a combination that gave families with differing preferences a convenient one-stop option. Marchetti's athletic celebrity drew fans into the restaurants and gave the brand a community character that was difficult to manufacture through marketing alone. Late 70s competition pushed the chain into the expansion mistake that undid many brands of that era, growing faster than the systems supporting the operation could sustain. Quality became inconsistent across the expanding network. The reputation that had been built through reliability began eroding as customers encountered variability. Traffic declined through the early 1980s. Marriott Corporation acquired the chain in 1982 and converted most locations to Roy Rogers restaurants. Geno's, which had been a genuine regional institution, was gone within years. Sambo's. Sambo's was founded in 1957 and grew over the following decades into one of the largest restaurant chains in the country, reaching more than 1,100 locations at its peak. The all-day breakfast menu built a devoted following, and the casual, unpretentious atmosphere made the restaurants an easy and reliable choice for ordinary family meals. The pancakes were a particular point of pride. The chain's name was a combination of its founders' names, but it also carried an unavoidable association with the children's book, The Story of Little Black Sambo, and that association had directly shaped the brand's original imagery and decor. As the civil rights movement reshaped American society's understanding of racial representation, what had seemed acceptable at the chain's founding became a source of sustained and intensifying public criticism. Rebranding attempts through the late 70s were too limited and arrived too late to contain the damage. Meanwhile, the financial strain of aggressive expansion had created structural vulnerabilities that the reputational problems compounded. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1982, and most of its locations were sold off or closed in the aftermath. Shoney's Big Boy. Shoney's Big Boy occupied a specific and irreplaceable place in the lives of the families who grew up near one. Born in the late 1940s and built around its recognizable mascot and double-decker burger, the chain had worked its way into the weekly routines of communities across the country. Sunday mornings, birthday dinners, post-game meals, after-church stops, Shoney's was the backdrop for all of them. The Big Boy burger was genuinely satisfying, stacked high with lettuce, tomato, and a sauce that regular customers could identify without being told. But the breakfast was what most people carried with them longest after the chain was gone. Hash browns cooked to a proper, consistent crisp, fluffy omelets, bacon and pancakes, and a generosity of portion that made the meal feel like something given rather than merely sold.
The all-you-can-eat salad bar added one more reason to return. The prices were low enough that feeding a family didn't require a special occasion to justify. Changing tastes and growing competition gradually wore the brand down. Bob's Big Boy continues in California, but those who remember the original Shoney's generally agree that what made it genuinely good hasn't been replicated. Red Barn. Red Barn came along in the early 1960s and built its identity around a physical feature no competitor could easily copy. The buildings themselves looked like actual red barns. The design was patented in 1962, and it gave every location an immediate visual recognition that functioned as its own form of marketing. You knew a red barn when you saw one from a quarter-mile away. The menu was ambitious. Flame-grilled burgers, fried chicken, a fish option, fresh salads, an early self-serve buffet arrangement called the Barn Buffet that anticipated the salad bar concept.
The chain reached more than 300 locations at its peak and had real momentum through the 70s. What Red Barn could never establish was a clear identity to match its distinctive appearance. The brand was never able to answer convincingly the basic question of what kind of restaurant it was: a serious burger competitor, a novelty experience, a family diner? Customers who liked it couldn't always say what it stood for, which made loyalty difficult to sustain. Food quality varied significantly from location to location, compounding the problem. By the early 1980s, most Red Barn locations had been shut down or converted, and the concept faded out without a definitive ending, remembered more for its unusual architecture than for anything it served. York Steakhouse. York Steakhouse found a specific and sensible niche: cafeteria-style dining inside shopping malls. Founded by General Mills, the chain opened hundreds of locations in malls across the United States through the 1970s, built around a straightforward value proposition for people who had spent a day shopping and needed a solid meal without a long wait. Tender steaks, baked potatoes, warm buttered rolls. Nothing surprising, nothing complicated, nothing that didn't deliver what it promised. For a shopper who wanted to eat well without ceremony or significant expense, York Steakhouse was a dependable and satisfying answer. The atmosphere, something between a medieval banquet hall and a well-organized cafeteria, had a character that worked for the context it occupied. Shifting dining preferences and the evolution of the mall itself gradually eroded the chain's position. Locations were closed quietly over the years, and York Steakhouse wound down without much notice. Wetson's. Wetson's was a New York story from beginning to end. Founded in 1959, the chain built a solid following across the metropolitan area over the following decade and a half, operating around 70 locations at its peak. The Big W burger, char-broiled, served with crispy fries, was the signature item. Retro car hop service at certain locations added a nostalgic dimension that customers responded to warmly. The signage was large and easy to read, giving each location a visible presence on the streets it occupied. When the chain merged with Nathan's Famous in the mid-1970s, the Wetson's name was quietly retired. The factors that contributed to its vulnerability were interconnected: inconsistent quality across locations, an inability to adapt strategically as the competitive landscape changed, high operating costs that couldn't be managed efficiently at its scale, and insufficient investment in brand development and infrastructure.
Without the franchise model strength or the operational innovations needed to compete with larger national players, Wetson's couldn't hold its position. By the late 70s, the name had disappeared. Pizza in America has always meant more than the sum of its ingredients. It shows up at the moments that define ordinary life: the birthday party, the Friday night with nowhere to be, the table that stays loud long after the food is gone. These are the pizza places that provided those moments. Most of them are gone now. Dino's Pizzeria. Dino's Pizzeria belongs to Canada rather than the United States, which is why most American audiences have never heard of it. In 1959, a 26-year-old Italian immigrant from Sardinia named Salvatore Pito arrived in Canada speaking limited English and carrying a clear sense of where he eventually wanted to end up.
He worked construction, took whatever jobs were available, and kept moving toward the thing that genuinely motivated him, sharing the food culture he had grown up with. He opened a restaurant in Quebec and later settled in Kirkland Lake, Ontario, a place that felt right for building something permanent. In 1970, Dino's Pizzeria opened there, the first pizza restaurant the town had ever had. The goal was honest and direct. Bring real pizza to people who hadn't experienced it, and do it with enough care that they'd want to come back. What Salvatore built became something larger than a restaurant. Dino's became a community institution, drawing customers from well outside Kirkland Lake to sit down over thin-crust pizzas in a room that felt genuinely warm and unhurried. Picture a cold Ontario winter, stepping in out of the dark, ordering something crispy and fragrant from the oven, sitting across from people you knew.
That specific combination of food and belonging was what Salvatore had been working toward. Even that depth of connection, though, couldn't hold against the shifting currents of how and where people chose to eat. Changing tastes and new competition gradually pulled customers away. Dino's faded from the life of Kirkland Lake, a beloved local institution that time eventually overtook. Pasquale's Pizza. For many people who remember Pasquale's Pizza, the first image is the Coral Springs, Florida location that opened in 1988. But the real story started 20 years earlier. In 1968, a 16-year-old named George Pasquale Sr. began working at a New Jersey pizza joint called Bruno's Pizza Town, absorbing everything the kitchen had to teach him. By 1974, with $400 saved and a large amount of determination, he opened the first Pasquale's restaurant. The space was modest, roughly 150 square meters, room for about 40 customers. He named it after his father, Pasquale. It wasn't impressive on the surface, but it had something that couldn't be bought. The smell that greeted you when you walked in. Fresh tomato sauce, rich cheese, dough working in a hot oven made it immediately clear that someone in that kitchen was paying close attention. George Sr. and his family insisted on quality in every ingredient. The menu extended well beyond pizza. Pasta, subs, stromboli, salads, garlic bread, wings. The full range of Italian-American cooking, priced accessibly enough that nobody had to hesitate before walking in. A second, slightly larger location opened in Bricktown, New Jersey in 1984. The growth was slow and earned entirely through what came out of the kitchen. It wasn't enough, ultimately, to compete against chains with vastly more capital and reach.
Larger operations moved into the markets Pasquale's had cultivated, and the family business was gradually pushed aside. A handful of locations survive today, a small trace of what was once a genuinely special restaurant. Sammy's Pizza. Sam Perella lost his job at an iron mine in Hibbing, Minnesota, and the path that followed went somewhere nobody would have predicted. He and his wife Louise opened a small coffee shop first, just to keep things moving. Then Sam started hearing from local veterans, men who had returned from military service who couldn't stop describing a dish called pizza. Sam decided to find out what they were talking about. He traveled to California, learned the craft properly, and came back ready to build something. He and Louise found a larger space in Hibbing, brought in the right equipment, and on October 2nd, 1954, Sammy's Pizza officially opened. It was among the first pizza restaurants in the city, and curiosity drew people in from the start. But curiosity doesn't explain why they kept returning for years. What Sam and Louise had built was a kitchen that treated every detail as though it mattered, because to them it did. Vegetables were fresh and cut by hand. Meat was sourced locally. Wisconsin mozzarella was shredded in-house. The spaghetti was something customers talked about long after the meal was finished. None of those details were advertised. They were simply tasted. Eating at Sammy's felt like being fed by people who genuinely wanted you to enjoy your meal. That quality, sincerity expressed through food, is not easy to manufacture, and it stays in people's memories long after the restaurant itself is gone. Petro's Pizza. Petro's Pizza was founded in 1957 in Longview, Washington by Norm Colby, and it developed steadily through the 60s and 70s before Colby sold it to the Campbell Soup Company. Campbell brought in the capital necessary to push expansion further, adding roughly 60 locations across Oregon and Washington before selling the chain again in the late 1980s. What made Petro's work during its best years was the atmosphere it created. The large tables and open floor plans were built for families, and families responded by making it a regular destination. Schools chose Petro's for events. Birthday parties filled the dining rooms. The buffet option, a rotating spread of pizzas and salads at a fixed price, meant that everyone at the table could find something they wanted without the evening becoming a negotiation. Kids moved around freely, while parents ate without rushing. The place organized itself around the people inside it. At its height, Petro's operated nearly 80 locations. The 90s brought a competitive environment that a chain of that size and structure couldn't navigate successfully. After passing to outside investors, the company filed for bankruptcy in 1994. Later ownership changes couldn't restore what had been lost. Fewer than 5 locations remain operating today. Red Barn. Red Barn appears here because pizza was a genuine and popular part of its offering, not simply an afterthought to the burgers. The chain was founded in 1961 in Ohio and grew to more than 400 locations across the United States, Canada, and Australia during its peak years. The barn-shaped buildings, design patented in 1962, gave every location an immediately recognizable identity. There was something genuinely inviting about the shape, something that communicated warmth rather than efficiency. Walking into a building designed to look like a farmhouse to eat pizza felt genuinely different from pulling into a standard fast food lot. The menu was broad: the Big Barney Burger, fried chicken, fish sandwiches, a salad bar, and the pizza and melted cheese combinations that kept dedicated customers coming back. The jingle, "When the Hungries hit the Red Barn," was the kind of thing that embedded itself in people's memories and stayed there for decades. Red Barn made serious efforts to survive into the late 90s and beyond, but competition intensified and the economics worked against it. The buildings are gone. The image of that red silhouette is not. Shakey's Pizza Parlor. Shakey's holds a distinction that no other pizza chain can claim. It was the first pizza franchise in the United States. Founded in Sacramento, California in 1954 by Sherwood Johnson, whose friends had given him the nickname Shakey because of a tremor caused by wartime malaria, the chain was built around the name rather than despite it. The opening weekend was genuinely chaotic. The pizza oven had not arrived in time, so the only thing available to serve the first customers was beer. The proceeds from that first weekend of beer sales funded the pizza ingredients for Monday. It was about as inauspicious a beginning as a restaurant can have. What followed was remarkable. Shakey's built its identity around a combination nobody had tried before: pizza and live jazz music performed inside the dining room. Customers didn't come only to eat, they came for an evening out, for the sound of a saxophone moving through a room full of people sharing a meal, for music that made the space feel alive. Shakey's is credited with contributing to a genuine revival of jazz culture in Sacramento during that period. The atmosphere it created was specific, unrepeatable, and enormously appealing. But that specificity was also the brand's vulnerability. Multiple ownership changes over the years complicated decision-making and diluted the consistency that had made the original concept work. When customer tastes shifted quickly, a business built so precisely around a particular kind of experience had limited capacity to respond. Shakey's faded from its former prominence. Most people today recall it only vaguely, a reminder that originality and longevity are not the same thing. Mr. Gatti's Pizza. Mr. Gatti's Pizza was created by a man who discovered that retirement didn't suit him. James R. Gaddis had served as an Air Force lieutenant colonel, and when his military career ended, he found that doing nothing was worse than he had imagined. In 1964, he opened a pizza and hamburger restaurant in Texas. He and his wife later moved to Austin and opened another location. A customer survey suggested the restaurant needed a stronger name, and his wife's maiden name, Gaddis, won decisively. The restaurant became Mr. Gatti's Pizza. The product justified the attention it received. The tomato sauce, made from freshly harvested tomatoes, was described by customers in terms usually reserved for significantly more expensive meals. The cheese, smoked provolone, gave the pizza a distinctiveness that standard mozzarella couldn't approach. People came because the pizza was genuinely good, and they came back because it remained that way. Through the 70s, investor interest grew and the chain expanded well beyond Texas. The 80s added game rooms and buffet counters, a combination that transformed Mr. Gotti's into a full family destination. Parents could sit with their food while children disappeared into the arcade, and everyone left satisfied. It was the chain at its most popular and most alive. Subsequent ownership changes disrupted the continuity that the brand had been built on. Mr. Gotti's still operates, but the specific energy that made it a destination in its prime years has not survived the transitions. Showbiz Pizza Place and Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater. The late 1970s and early 80s produced one of the most unusual restaurant concepts in American history, the entertainment pizza parlor, where fried dough and arcade games and singing animatronic robots occupied the same building and somehow created an experience that children of that era remember with extraordinary vividness. Nolan Bushnell, the creator of Atari, opened the first Pizza Time Theater in San Jose, California in 1977. His idea was to relocate the video game experience from adult arcades into a family-friendly environment, surround it with rides and animatronic musical performances, and serve pizza to the parents while the children disappeared into everything else. The concept worked immediately and completely. Kids who had never set foot in an arcade became devoted regulars, and their parents came willingly because the food was good and the room was genuinely fun. Robert Brock had been a partner of Bushnell and believed the animatronic performance element deserved more serious development than Bushnell was investing in it. He left and founded Showbiz Pizza Place, opening his first location in Kansas City, Missouri on March 3, 1980. Showbiz leaned harder into the performance and entertainment side of the concept, and the approach succeeded on the same wave of arcade culture that was moving through American popular life. By 1984, Pizza Time Theater had run into financial difficulties severe enough to force a bankruptcy filing. Showbiz acquired it. Years of attempts to reconcile the two identities under a unified brand produced more confusion than clarity. Then, home gaming consoles matured. Nintendo and what came after it gave children sophisticated gaming experiences in their own living rooms, and the economics that had made these entertainment restaurants viable shifted beneath them. When the arcade was no longer genuinely novel, the animatronic shows began to look dated. The business model couldn't outlast the novelty it had been built on. Those who were children during the peak years carry very specific memories. The anticipation before the robot show, the methodical accumulation of paper tickets, the serious deliberation over what those tickets could buy, and the pizza eaten in the middle of all of it, barely noticed because everything else was competing for attention. Those memories are vivid, and they belong to a moment that cannot be revisited. Round Table Pizza. Round Table Pizza operated under a slogan that made a direct claim: the last honest pizza. The founder, William Larson, had left high school without graduating, served 4 years in the Navy, and worked through a series of unstable jobs before deciding to open something of his own. He launched his first pizza parlor in California in late December of 1959, naming it after the large, round redwood tables he and his father had built together when he was young. Those tables carried meaning beyond their function. They were a symbol of what Larson wanted the restaurant to be: a place where people gathered around something shared, where every seat was equal. Dine-in, takeout, and delivery were all available from early on, making Round Table flexible enough to serve the full range of customer needs across any given week. By 1978, the chain had grown to more than 200 locations. It was a genuine success built on a consistent product and a clear sense of purpose. In 2011, financial pressures forced a bankruptcy filing. The chain emerged from that process the same year, but never returned to its former position. Like others before it, Round Table found that a beloved concept and a long track record are not sufficient protection against the accumulated pressures of a market that keeps changing. Happy Joe's Pizza. Happy Joe's Pizza owes its existence to a workplace argument. Lawrence Joseph Whitty, known to everyone as Happy Joe, was working at a Shakey's pizza location when his manager reprimanded him for organizing a birthday party for a child during his shift. His response was not to apologize. He left and opened his own restaurant. Happy Joe's Pizza opened in Bettendorf, Iowa in 1972. The founding spirit was visible in everything the brand did: great food, a genuinely welcoming atmosphere, and a particular dedication to making birthday celebrations feel special. Word spread quickly about what Happy Joe's created for kids and families. The food had its own claims. The chain maintained that it was the first pizza restaurant to put taco pizza on a menu, a combination that drew real enthusiasm from customers. The frozen whipped dessert served under the name yogurt was another unconventional touch that people carried in their memories. What distinguished Happy Joe's from the louder entertainment pizza concepts of the same era was its atmosphere. The environment was peaceful and cozy rather than chaotic, and customers loved it for exactly that quality. Over time, shifting tastes created challenges the brand couldn't fully meet. Happy Joe's contracted significantly from its peak, a business born from frustration, built on genuine hospitality, and limited ultimately by the same market forces that caught up with everyone else.
Straw Hat Pizza. Straw Hat Pizza was founded on July 10, 1959, by Charlie Olson and Bill Henderlong, two men who had worked together previously at Meaned's Pizza and had concluded they could do better. The first Straw Hat restaurant opened in San Leandro, California in 1960. The name was borrowed from the straw hats worn by employees at various California pizza establishments of the period, a small detail that became a brand identity. The product distinction was real and maintained consistently: a lighter,
crispier crust than most competitors were producing, establishing a California-style pizza reputation the chain wore with confidence. The menu showed genuine creativity: vegetable pizza, barbecue pizza, mushu chicken pizza, lemon pepper chicken pizza. Those weren't flavor combinations that most pizza chains were attempting, and the willingness to try them gave Straw Hat a character that extended beyond the crust.
The atmosphere was taken seriously as part of the offering. A free ride for children called Charlie Horse was one of the features that made Straw Hat a family destination rather than simply a place to eat. Dine-in was the primary experience. At its peak, the chain was operating more than 200 locations. Then Domino's, Pizza Hut, and Papa John's expanded their national footprints and reorganized the competitive landscape around the chains with the deepest resources and the broadest delivery infrastructure. A regional chain, however well regarded, couldn't match that scale. Straw Hat's excellent crust and welcoming dining rooms weren't sufficient to hold a position against what the national players were building. Sbarro. The Sbarro story is about a family business that grew far beyond its origins and then found itself unable to hold together under the weight of what it had become.
Gennaro and Carmela Sbarro, along with their 3 sons, arrived from Italy and established the company in 1956. Their first Brooklyn location was a salumeria, an Italian grocery store, that quickly developed a reputation for the freshness and care evident in everything it offered. What set the original Sbarro apart from similar establishments was its dining service. Customers could sit down to a real meal rather than simply picking up items at a counter. That difference mattered to the community around it, and the business grew on the strength of that distinction. Through the 70s, 14 additional New York locations followed, all supplied from the original Brooklyn location. Carmela continued making her cheesecake by hand. The feeling that everything was freshly made, that the family was still actively present in the kitchen. That was what customers experienced, and it was what brought them back. The difficulties that accumulated in the 2000s were ultimately insurmountable. The World Trade Center location was destroyed in the September 11th attacks of 2001, a loss that was both financially and emotionally devastating. Other challenges compounded over the following years. In 2014, the company filed for bankruptcy, the end of a journey that had started with a grocery store in Brooklyn and a family that believed in making things properly. Pizza Inn. Pizza Inn was founded in 1958 by 2 Texas brothers, F.J. and R.L. Spillman, in a location directly across the street from the Southern Methodist University campus. The placement was deliberate, and it worked immediately. Students became regulars from the beginning, and the reputation the restaurant built among them spread outward from there. The innovations came steadily, and they were genuine.
The pizza buffet concept, introduced in the late 1960s, was a bold idea for its moment. Pay one price, eat as much as you want, try whatever the kitchen is producing. That combination of unlimited variety and fixed cost was irresistible to exactly the kind of customer a campus-adjacent restaurant could reach. Taco pizza arrived in 1979. A dessert pizza called Pizzert followed in 1986. A bacon cheeseburger pizza came later. The experimental impulse never left the chain entirely. What sustained the loyal customers during the golden years, though, was something more fundamental than novelty. A crust with a distinctive biscuit-like texture and a slightly tangy sauce that produced a flavor profile customers couldn't find anywhere else. The chain secured endorsement deals with the Von Erich wrestling family, Carrie, Kevin, and Mike appearing in television commercials, which brought regional celebrity energy to the brand at its most popular. Nearly 800 locations at peak. Bankruptcy in 1989. recovery in 1991, sale in 1994. A brand built on real innovation and a genuinely distinctive product, unable, in the end, to escape the weight of its accumulated financial problems. Pizza Haven. Pizza Haven understood early what takes many businesses years to learn. Removing friction for the customer is itself a form of quality. Ron Bean founded the company in 1958, and the first location opened in Seattle's University District, directly beside the University of Washington campus. Students who were exhausted and didn't want to leave their rooms had a simple option: pick up the phone and have pizza delivered. That was genuinely novel in 1958, and it drew customers immediately. Convenience drove the expansion through the 60s and 70s. Pizza Haven grew to 42 restaurants across the Pacific Northwest and California. The brand also reached internationally, establishing locations in Russia, Poland, and the Middle East, a remarkable geographic footprint for a chain rooted in a Seattle neighborhood. The late 90s brought pressure from national chains with budgets that Pizza Haven couldn't match. Leasing difficulties in certain mall locations created additional friction, and according to Bean himself, a missed tax payment was among the final factors that pushed the company past the point of recovery. Pizza Haven filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 1998. Nearly all locations closed. A small number survived at Seattle Center. Noble Roman's Pizza. Noble Roman's was built on someone else's failure. In 1969, Stephen Hughes and Gary Kennard purchased a pizza parlor near Indiana University that was failing and turned it around. They formally incorporated as a company in 1972. Hughes was a business school graduate, and he treated the operation as a serious enterprise built on a specific foundation: product quality that was operational and consistent, not merely aspirational. That commitment showed in every detail. No fillers in the meats or cheeses. Pizza dough made from specially milled, high-protein flour blended with cornmeal, producing a crust with a flavor and texture that set Noble Roman's apart from everything else in the market. Quality wasn't something customers had to be told about. They simply tasted it, and they noticed. As the university community expanded and student populations grew through the 70s and 80s, Noble Roman's benefited from a loyal and growing customer base. The chain moved from Indiana into Ohio and additional states. By the mid-2000s, it had surpassed 1,000 locations, a remarkable journey from a struggling pizza parlor near a college campus. Operational difficulties accumulated over time, and franchisee lawsuits followed, alleging problems with how the system was being managed. The number of locations declined. The company that had built itself on a competitor's failure found itself facing its own and could not fully resolve it. Pistol Pete's Pizza. Pistol Pete's Pizza opened its first location in 1974 as a modest neighborhood pizza restaurant built around a cowboy-themed mascot. Over the years that followed, the chain evolved into something considerably closer to Chuck E. Cheese's, a full entertainment experience built around pizza and an extensive floor of arcade games. That evolution made Pistol Pete's a reliable choice for birthday parties and family outings, with games calibrated slightly older than those at Chuck E. Cheese, attracting teenagers alongside younger children. The food was more varied than the entertainment-first concept might suggest. Multiple pizza styles and specialty pies anchored the menu, alongside pasta dishes, sandwiches, and salads. There was genuinely something for every person at the table. Peter Piper Pizza acquired Pistol Pete's in 1995, intending to absorb the successful elements of the brand into its own operation. From the outside, the acquisition looked like a reasonable business transaction. In practice, it was the beginning of the end for Pistol Pete's as a distinct identity. The brand was absorbed gradually, its character disappearing into its new parent. Today, it is remembered mainly by those who had birthday parties there, a chain that was consumed by a competitor and left behind little but a generation's worth of nostalgia. Godfather's Pizza. Godfather's Pizza was founded in 1973 in Omaha, Nebraska. Greg Johnson had the original concept, then sold both the name and the restaurant to Willie Thiessen in 1974. Under Thiessen, the chain grew with striking speed, earning recognition from the National Restaurant Association as the fastest-growing franchise in the country from 1977 through 1979. At its peak, Godfather's was operating nearly 1,000 locations. The branding drew deliberately on the Coppola film and committed to it fully. The restaurants were designed with a moody, gray-toned atmosphere that felt genuinely evocative of the movie's visual world. Television advertising built the same imagery and produced a slogan that lodged permanently in the memory of anyone who heard it. A pizza you can't refuse. It was the kind of marketing that transformed a restaurant chain into something approaching a cultural artifact. The food justified the attention the branding attracted. The pizza was made with generous cheese and carefully chosen toppings that together produced something satisfying enough to stand as a complete meal. Breadsticks, fries, cookies, and pasta rounded out the menu. Customers could choose among original, golden, mozzarella-loaded, and thin crusts, enough variation to accommodate every preference at a shared table. In more recent years, shifting tastes and changing dining habits have reduced Godfather's reach considerably. The story follows the arc familiar from so many of the chains on this list. A powerful cultural identity, a genuinely good product, and an eventual inability to hold the ground that the best years had built. Time and taste moved on, as they always do. Those are all 40 names across both lists. Pizza places and restaurant chains from the 1970s and the decades surrounding them, places woven into the ordinary rhythms of American life, into the birthday dinners and the highway stops and the Friday evenings and the Sunday mornings. Most of them are entirely gone. A few survive in reduced form. If any of them were part of your story, you already know what made them worth remembering and why they're worth missing.